So, because we would like to give the floor to David Ingleby, who is a very eminent specialist in the domain of migrant health. And by error, I sent an email to another person who was also called David, and he said, "I was surprised that you wanted me to talk about this subject. Nobody could do this better than David Ingleby." So, David, the floor is yours.
In the Netherlands, we say if you want to have a good meal, go to Belgium. And we have a fantastic meal today with Master Chef Hans. He organised 7 courses, and there was a great variety. It was kind of fusion cuisine from lots of different countries, very nutritious. But the problem is, you probably don't have any more appetite, especially for a dessert. So I will try to go very quickly through my talk. I'm going to describe a research project. So it's something different. I'm giving you a research perspective on all these activities concerned with equity in health. And it's about the MIPEX Health strand. And I have 3 topics. What is the strand? What results did we get from it in 2015? And what does it tell us about our specific topic today, which is responsiveness to diversity? We have a special scale for that called Scale C, and I'll give you some results. Now, this is what the summary report looks like. It's quite important to know where to find it, because a lot of my graphs and details are not easy to see. So if you want to look up the results, you just have to Google MIPEX Health Strand Summary Report, or some combination of those words, and you will get this document. Instrument for measuring the equity of policies in different countries concerning migrants' health. Now, I know we're talking about a much broader concept of diversity today, but to some extent it overlaps with those other aspects. Now, we don't just look at policies laid down by governments. In MIPEX, in the traditional MIPEX, most of it is about government policy, but as you know, the rules and regulations and policies in health are made at many different levels. They're made sometimes by service provider organizations, sometimes by insurance companies, so it's a much more complex concept. Now, in 2015, we used this instrument for the first time, and we covered 38 countries, mostly European, but also Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. And there will be another round of the survey next year, in 2020. So, let me tell you what MIPEX is. It's called the Migrant Integration Policy Index, and it looks at areas which are very important for immigrants to participate in society. and they're quite well-known areas. Everybody knows the labour market must be accessible, family reunion policies must be favourable, and so on. What is missing, what we thought was missing, was health. Because people don't realise how important it is. Firstly, how important it is to be healthy in order to integrate in a society. For example, if you're too sick to work, it's very difficult to integrate. But secondly, health integration determines your ability to be healthy. It provides you with money and social capital and skills, and it's necessary. Integration is necessary to keep your health. So we decided to add this seventh strand, the eighth strand, and I'm going to skip the next two slides because you don't want to know what a long and complicated story it was to make it. And I'll show this map. Yes, you don't want to know that. This map, I don't want you to take it too seriously, because in the report itself, it has a lot of footnotes saying, there are many possible sources of error here, or distortion or bias. For example, Antonio mentioned, even in a single region of Italy, there are big variations in the availability of cultural mediators. So it was a bit of an exaggeration to say we summarized the situation in each country. We didn't. We had contacts in certain places and they could tell us what they knew, but a lot of it is a mystery. So I prefer not to show that slide because it tends to start conflicts. Because people say, why isn't my country red? Or why is it blue? Incidentally, the red ones are the good ones. They're the ones doing most. Then you have orange, yellow, green, and blue. And when you get to blue, there's almost nothing being done for equity in migrant health. So another reason why you shouldn't take it too seriously is that it's one-dimensional. It only looks at the total score. But there are many different ways in which you can a health system can be good or bad for migrants. You need to look at the four scales or dimensions. First is entitlement to health services. That's to say, do we really have universal health coverage in this country? Is everybody entitled to healthcare coverage? The second is what I call a soft kind of access. Are there practical or cultural or linguistic barriers to getting into care? See, entitlement is a hard barrier. If you're not entitled to coverage, your bills will not be paid. You'll have to pay them yourself. Or you can get private health insurance, but that's very expensive. But other barriers are softer in the sense that you can get help to overcome. Then once you get inside the system, the question is, are the services responding to your needs? And that's the one that's interesting for today. And the last scale is we call measures to achieve change, and they're more fundamental things like collecting data or organizing governance, getting stakeholders together, managing the whole business of multicultural healthcare. Now, having split it up into four, I'm going to put it back into two. The first two you can combine and call it access in general, hard and soft barriers to access. And the second two I also combine, which is a bit naughty of me because D is not really about health services. But the curious thing is, C and D are very highly correlated, which tells me that when governments prioritize migrant health, they mostly have in mind responsiveness, so, what we used to call cultural competence. They don't think so much about entitlements, because those are political issues, and there's not much you can do about them. If a new government comes along and cuts out migrants from healthcare entitlement, there's nothing the health system can do about it, or not much. So we looked at A and B versus C and D. That's entitlement versus quality. And the point is, access versus quality. You can be good or bad in different ways. Here are countries that have poor access and poor quality. And the interesting thing is, there's an awful lot of these green dots. The green dots are the EU 13 countries, the countries which joined the EU after 2004. Greece is down there as well. And the conditions there are very bad for migrants. You go this way, and you have Switzerland, New Zealand, Norway, who have good access and good quality. But here is France and Iceland a bit below it. And in France you have fantastic access as a migrant, but nobody will give you different care. At least there will be very few concessions made to diversity, because the basic principle in France is égalité, and they don't seem to notice that different needs require different services. So cultural competence is not popular in France. If we compare, for example, France with the UK, you can see they're complete opposites. In the UK, UK would have used to be right at the top right-hand corner. But then in 2010, a political party, which I will not name, came to power, and they decided that migrants did not deserve access to our wonderful National Health Service. David Cameron said, it's not an international health service. So they cut down a lot of the entitlements and a lot of the money for informing migrants about health services. So UK is right down there near the bottom for access, but at the top for quality. It's very paradoxical. That's why I say, don't just look at the total scores. Now, let's look at the four non-European countries. We have, especially interesting for our visitors, we have New Zealand, United States, Australia, and Canada. Canada was having a bad time because Stephen Harper, was it, I think? He was cutting down entitlements, especially for refugees. So they're down on access. Australia was doing badly, USA as well. For example, even where you have affordable care, Obamacare, you can't access free care, Medicare and Medicaid, until you've lived there for 5 years. So USA has never worried too much about access. It's up to you to get rich and buy good health care. But New Zealand is the only place where there seems to be a good combination of access and quality. You can look at it another way, and you can see here, entitlements are better in Europe than in these what we call them traditional countries of immigration. But when you look at the other scales, apart from accessibility, there's a big difference between responsiveness and achieving change. And that's a question that's interested me for a long time. I mean, is Europe really behind these countries in migrant health? And the answer is no, not if you take access into account. Yeah, I mentioned the EU 13 problem, that's those countries there. The interesting thing about that is, you might think it's just a question of money, because money is very important for the level of attention to diversity. That's more complex than it looks, because it's not just a question of having the resources, it's also having the migrants. In poor countries, you don't get many migrants. So there's not much incentive to make care diversity sensitive. But what we found is that it's not just a question of money in these new accession countries. It's a very different attitude to migrants, much more hostility to migrants. And you see that in the arguments between the EU and some Eastern European countries who are fanatically opposed to having any migrants at all. If they can possibly help it, they don't want them. And it's always interested me that the people who have little or no contact with migrants are all completely sure that migrants would be a disaster for their country. So, yeah, that's another way of looking at the same thing. It's especially in responsiveness, these mainly Eastern European countries do almost nothing. 8 of them do literally nothing in terms of responsiveness. And yeah, finally we looked at different categories of migrants, regular migrants, asylum seekers, and undocumented migrants, and we found this. In the more wealthy countries, you can see it's a linear decrease. Poor countries, it's generally poorer, but especially for legal migrants. Now, what this is saying is that even legal migrants or regular migrants don't get anything like 100% entitlements. You get, for example, countries like the UK, where migrants are expected to pay tax and subsidise the National Health Service, but they're not allowed to use it. So they're paying twice for their health care. Then asylum seekers, you would expect that they would be well looked after, but in fact they're not. They're halfway between regular migrants and irregular migrants. And with irregular migrants, they are to a large extent left to the mercy or the discretionary decisions of doctors and receptionists and accountants. So the situation, I think, is still pretty bad. Now, finally, I'm going to look at scale C in a bit more detail. How are we doing? Okay. This is a rather complicated slide. These are the topics. First, interpretation, then diversity, sensitivity or cultural competence, then training and education, then involvement of migrants, participation, then encouraging diversity in the health service workforce, and then capacity and methods. And the capacity and methods, those are special services developed or methodologies developed for helping migrants. Now, when you add all those up, what do you get?
Well, first of all, you get this huge range from 93% in the UK down to 0 in Estonia, Slovakia, Poland, Macedonia, Greece, Bulgaria, Latvia, and Croatia. So you see there is a huge difference in the migrant friendliness of health services in Europe. The structure is also very interesting. We did a factor analysis on this, and you can see that 5 items are clustered together. These down here. But number 17 is all by itself. And what does that mean? Well, it means that I made a big mistake in including the diversity of the workforce in the instrument. And I should have known better, because James, I remember having a disagreement with James about this in a meeting 2 or 3 years ago. No, it must have been 3 or 4 years ago. And James was saying we shouldn't really consider that to be so important. And the answer is health services also don't consider it to be so important. So I think that's a question I'm going to drop in the next round of MIPEX. So I hope this has shown you that the MIPEX Health strand has many useful lessons for improving health equity for migrants. Entitlements are very specific to migrants, but when we're looking at ethnic minorities generally, or indigenous minorities, then the scales B, C, and D are just as important for other groups as for migrants. So I hope you found it interesting. If you want to find it, just do MIPEX on Google. Just Google MIPEX. You will find the main site with all the results. And if you do MIPEX Health Strand or MIPEX Health Summary Report, you will get the summary report. Thank you very much.